Happy Monday, class. We're going to get into our lesson for today. Today we're going to be continuing our lesson on the kingdom of the Nile, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But first of all, just a couple of things about this week. Of course, first of all, I'm not here, so we're going to be doing some different things this week. Make sure that you are staying up with your work, though, because while I may not be here, you are all on my minds, and so I will be checking my email. I will be checking your assignments and correcting your assignments, even though I'm not here in person this week. One more thing, we won't be doing startouts this week. It is a shortened week, and it'll probably just be a little bit easier if we go without doing the startouts. So we will not be doing startouts this week. That being said, that brings us to our lesson for today. Now, last time we had class, we talked about the old kingdom of Egypt and how Egypt was really affected by the Nile River. Of course, we get into our lesson here by going through topics and into the ancient Middle East and Egypt. The lesson we're looking at is Kingdom of the Nile. That's chapter 2, section 3. This one right here. All right, so took me a second there. Now, what we've been doing as we're going through this lesson is, of course, we're trying to see how did the Nile River influence the civilization of ancient Egypt. And if we're looking at our objectives again, yesterday we looked at these two. Geography helped shape ancient Egypt. Today, and the Old Kingdom, the achievements of the Old Kingdom. Today we're going to be looking at the Middle Kingdom and also the New Kingdom. So that's going to be our goals today. Just a reminder that you should definitely 100% be completing all the parts that are necessary in your notes, including the terms of people. So if you haven't done the terms of people yet, make sure you get to that. Just got to get to the correct slide here. I believe we definitely talked about the pyramids last time, and we talked about how they were totally pillaged for all their treasure, which is really unfortunate. We don't know as much about Egypt because of that. All right, so there's a gap in time. If you look back, we talked about the Old Kingdom, and the Old Kingdom runs through, it depends on the age you're looking at, but roughly 1900 BC. The New Kingdom doesn't even start for another 300 to 400 years after that. So what happened for 300 to 400 years when the Old Kingdom collapsed? Well, first of all, the Old Kingdom collapsed. Really, a big reason for it was climate change. Climate change, as I've said before, is not a new thing. Climate change has been happening all through history. And a lot of people believe that in ancient Egypt, from the writings and evidence they've dug up, that much less rain started to fall. The floods became less regular. And also, Egypt was spending a ton of money building pyramids, temples, and other huge pieces of architecture. So because they spent all their money, and then climate started to change, which caused crops to not be as readily produced, that was like a double whammy. No money, no food to get, and no food and no money to get food. So this became a huge problem and really led to the collapse of the Old Kingdom. So what happened for those 300 gap years? Really what happened was smaller leaders kind of took over small sections of Egypt. It wasn't one dominant pharaoh anymore or a dominant dynasty. Really what it became was all these smaller leaders basically just controlling small villages, cities, and areas of Egypt. And that continued for several hundred years. So that's continued until finally one leader was able to take control of all of Egypt again and rename himself Pharaoh. and his family line the proper dynasty. One thing is a lot of architecture took place in order to make that happen. Doing a lot more canals, ditches, dikes, different things to make the water controlled and able to use. Also, those local leaders, those local aristocrats who were kind of in charge, their power got nixed because obviously the pharaoh wants to take full control. Another thing Egypt is able to do during this time is kind of fix the money problem in a way. The way that you fix the money problem is the area that was just south of Egypt, which we've talked about before, Nubia. Very, very gold-rich area. Nubia was in the mountainous areas south of Egypt in current days, it would be like Sudan. And that area was very, very rich in gold at this time. When the Egyptians, under the new pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom, are able to kind of get some dominance over the kingdom of Kush and Nubia, they're able to get a lot of money because there's a lot of gold there. And that helps any kingdom if you have a lot of money. During this time, there's also a lot of trade that's going on in the Middle Kingdom. Okay, speaking of these Nubians, here's a map that kind of shows it a little bit better. In ancient Nubia was below Egypt. So here's Egypt here. Of course, you've got Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. And then the cataracts occur on the Nile River, those rocky, rapidy, waterfall-infested parts of the Nile River that you really couldn't navigate with a boat. Well, just below that is the Kingdom of Nubia, sometimes also known as the Kingdom of Kush. The Nubians were well known for being very, very great traders. Basically, what the Nubians were able to do is trade with all different parts of Africa for a lot of Africa's greatest resources. And then they took those resources and traded them with Egypt and other areas in Asia and Europe. So really what the Kingdom of Kush and Nubia is able to do is they're able to get Africa's great products and share them with a lot of the rest of the world at the time, which was a big deal. Some of the things that they produced or were able to trade were things like gold. I already mentioned that they were very rich in gold. Everyone wants it. Ivory. Hopefully you know what ivory is, but if you don't, of course, those are elephant tusks. Ivory was really desirable, especially for jewelry and even medicine a little bit. And then iron. Iron was just starting to get used more and more in the ancient world at this time. And the Nubians had quite a bit of it. And then finally, exotic skins. Some of those animals that live in Africa, which would have been plentiful in Africa, especially when they weren't endangered back at this time. But in other parts of the world, they would have really valued these skins, things like giraffe, lion, cheetah, skins like that, which were very desirable. These things were traded all around the world. So not only is Nubia wealthy because of the gold that they have, they're also now wealthy because of the trade that they're able to do. Don't get me wrong, though. The Middle Kingdom was not all perfect. It was not perfect at all. The Nile didn't rise as regularly. I mean, that climate change issue was still a problem. And so that still caused problems if the Nile River wasn't rising and flooding the way that it normally should. Sometimes there were down years. And that can cause problems. It can cause rebellions, and it can cause corruption. Because when things get serious, people will do anything to stay afloat. So around 1700 BC, this foreign group called the Hyksos, and the Hyksos in Egyptian really just means invaders, outsiders. So this group of people invaded Egypt, and they had a new technology the Egyptians did not, and that was the chariot. Likely, as we've learned from our other presentations, the chariot was really developed and made really good under the Hittites. So it's likely that the Hittites were able to kind of share that technology, and the Hyksos people used that technology to overthrow and take Egypt down. Now, Egypt was already a little bit down at the time, so it was easier. But with that new technology, it was it was the death wish here for Egypt. The Hyksos were able to rule Egypt for several hundred years until finally new leaders were able to arise in Egypt and throw the Hyksos out. Of course, using the Hyksos' own technology, the chariots and the iron. Really cool picture down here, by the way, too. This is more of a modern take on what that would have looked like. But then down here, you can see a picture of Egyptians using chariots. And in this case, the big dominant Egyptian figure here using the chariots to really overthrow the other army that they were facing. So our last kingdom in Egypt is called the New Kingdom. It's pretty easy, guys. Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. All right, so New Kingdom pharaohs really grew powerful. And one of the big things that happens in the New Kingdom is Egypt gets the biggest that it ever was. During the New Kingdom, Egypt's land, Egypt's empire, grows to being the largest in the history of ancient Egypt. It goes as far north as Syria, so you can see this entire yellow area really shows you what the Egyptian empire would have looked like during this time. Going all the way north to Syria, really the main rival of the Egyptians at this time was the Hittites. And so we'll talk more about that later, the rivalry between the Hittites and the Egyptians during the New Kingdom. But Egypt also dipped very far south into Nubia, and during this time, Egypt controlled much of Nubia as well. One thing that's very interesting during this time is Egypt has its first ever female pharaoh. Now, that's confusing because females are not supposed to be pharaohs. The line of succession, the dynasties in ancient Egypt were supposed to be male. So how does a female end up in charge? Well, the female's name was Hatshepsut. And Hatshepsut was married to the pharaoh, obviously, and he died fairly young. At the time, Hatshepsut did not necessarily have an heir of her own with the pharaoh. But the pharaoh did, when he died, the pharaoh did have a son with a secondary wife. Now, it's a little unclear how this dynamic all kind of works. Did that secondary wife also die? And that's why Hatshepsut took over control of her basically stepson? Or did Hatshepsut have that secondary wife kind of eliminated so that she would have access and control over that stepson? We're not exactly sure how that goes down, but Hatshepsut basically takes over control of her stepson. Her stepson was very young at the time when her husband died, the pharaoh, and so her stepson is supposed to be the next pharaoh. But since he's so young, 2-3 years old, obviously he can't make decisions. So that falls on Hatshepsut and some of the other advisors in Egypt. So for roughly 17 or 18 years here, Hatshepsut leads Egypt for her young stepson. And it's kind of interesting because this happened a few other times in Egyptian history. I mean, there were a few other times where females had to lead or advise their younger sons until their sons came of age and could officially become pharaoh. But Hatshepsut took it a little bit further. She didn't just want to be an advisory role. She wanted to be pharaoh herself. So she took some pretty drastic steps. All of the statues and paintings around Egypt that she had of herself made all basically projected her as being male. One of the things, she would wear the pharaoh headdress, which of course only the men were supposed to wear. Typically pharaohs would shave their heads and then put on the headdress. We're not sure if Hatshepsut actually shaved her head or not, but in all the artwork of her, she definitely has the look of that. So she may have. Also, pharaohs would wear a long beard. This right here, that was very traditional of a pharaoh. Well, Hatshepsut had a false beard made and would wear it. So she would wear that fake beard in order to project the idea that she is a legitimate pharaoh. So not only did she rule for her stepson, give him advice, she actually took over as a pharaoh herself and co-ruled with her son until her son finally did come of age and took over the throne from his stepmother. Son was named Thutmose III. He ended up being one of the greatest leaders in ancient Egypt. And he may have learned a lot of those skills from his stepmom, because Hatshepsut was a very great leader as well. She made a lot of good decisions for Egypt, a lot of things of expansion, trade, and even some battles that were very successful. So Hatshepsut really should get a lot of credit as being one of the world's first female leaders who was very, very successful. Well, like I said, her son Thutmose III took over and was even more successful, at least if you're talking about expanding Egypt. He literally expanded Egypt to its largest extent in the history, all the way to the Euphrates River, all the way down into Nubia and Kush. Then we get to one of probably the most famous pharaohs in history, Ramses II. Ramses II is pharaoh for 66 years. That's amazing. First of all, because at this time in history, people didn't live that long a lot of times. Living to 66 would be amazing, let alone being a ruler for 66 years, which means Ramses II lived even more than to the age of 66. A lot of people think that this very well may have been the pharaoh during the time of the Exodus. So when the Jews left the land of Egypt, some believe that it was during the time of Ramses II, which is interesting to us as Christians. At this time, Egypt's biggest rival was the Hittites. Yes, those Hittites, the ones with iron and chariots and everything else. The Egyptians and the Hittites spent year after year during the time of war, which was, typically in the summer times. During the times of war, they would continually fight each other, burning up valuable resources, burning up lots of men, lots of warriors. It was pretty draining on both sides. They were both pretty dominant too. Who's really going to come out on top? Is it going to be the Egyptians or is it going to be the Hittites? Well, years and years of fighting ensued until Ramses and the Hittites do something that hasn't really been recorded in the world before. There's been empires for a few thousand years now, but one thing that really never occurs is the idea that you don't fight. I mean, if I'm an empire and there's another empire over here, naturally, each and every year or lots of the time, we're gonna fight each other. It's just what empires do. You have to fight for dominance. The new thing that occurs during Ramses' reign is a peace treaty. It's the world's first recorded peace treaty, and we actually have evidence from it from the Hittites side and the Egyptian side. So it's pretty well corroborated. What happened was, I think from the evidence we have, Ramses saw that, you know what, my empire's pretty big and it's pretty successful. The only thing really dragging us down is this constant conflict. Hittites must have felt similarly. And Ramses was able to broker a peace treaty where they decided not to fight each other anymore. The Hittites said, we'll go this far. The Egyptians said, we'll go this far. And we won't do this yearly struggle and battle that costs us all this money, resources, and people. Peace, imagine that. A brilliant idea, because this actually made Egypt extremely prosperous. They were used to continually over and over again having to fight, having to lose all this money and resources. Now they're free. And this was very, very good for Egypt. Egypt becomes extremely wealthy under Ramses II, very successful. Many, many building projects are able to be built at this time. Lots of gold coming into Egypt. Egypt uses Nubian charioteers, all different kinds of things like that. the Nubians really do become a big part of Egyptian culture. It almost starts to kind of meld together. The Nubians were, again, those people who lived to the south of Egypt. Today, we would say it was being the area of Sudan, a little, maybe even down to Ethiopia. All right, here's a few pictures that I have that kind of show the relationships between the Nubians and the Egyptians. Now, the Nubians and Egyptians always kind of had a back and forth relationship with each other. There were times where the Nubians were more powerful and were able to kind of dominate the Egyptians for at least a period of time. More often, the Egyptians were able to get the upper hand on the Nubians. But these pictures kind of show us a few things about it. First of all, this picture up here, actually of a Nubian queen, can show us a lot of things. First of all, we see the Egyptian hieroglyphs in the background, which tell us that the Nubians learned things from the Egyptians. The Egyptian language was a big part of Nubian culture. We can also see these Egyptian slaves working on the Nubian princess's hair. You can also see some of the different kinds of food that they would have eaten. You can see the ducks or geese or whatever the type of animal this is down here. A lot of different things we can learn about culture by looking at these pictures and drawings on the board. Down here, you can see a picture of the army. I'm not sure if you can see this, but the Nubians were known for being a few different things. One of them, the Nubians were known for being very tall, at least in comparison with the Egyptians. You can see that from this picture right here. Now, is it exaggerated? Probably. Like it was in that picture that we looked at with Mesopotamia and the big man being bigger than everyone else. But it seems like in ancient Egyptian culture, this was more than just exaggeration. It really was. The the Nubians were well known for being extremely tall, average heights of over 6 feet. When you consider the Egyptians at this time would have had average heights around 5 feet. And I'm talking for guys. So people were a lot shorter back then, except the Nubians were actually a very tall people. They were also known for being extremely great warriors, especially with the bow and arrow technology. There's stories about Nubian warriors being able to shoot a target with a bow for, upwards of 200 yards. That's like 2 football fields. They were able to hit targets with their bows. So very, very impressive. And when you look at this picture here, you can see these very large Nubian warriors, basically standing taller than the Egyptians who are in the chariot. And then over here, we actually did look at this picture before, but this one right here shows the traders in Nubia and some of the products that they would have brought. I would love to ask you guys about what these products are, but since I'm not here, I'll just tell you a few. First of all, you got these gold chains, and this would have been the way that they carried gold back in the day and sold and traded gold. It wouldn't have been in bars or coins. It would have been in these links. Then you could see that they're carrying different things like animal skins. You can see it looks like maybe a cheetah skin here. This big tube that this Nubian is holding over his shoulder, it almost looks like a bundle. That's actually ivory. So that would have been chopped up ivory. That was a big product. And then of course, exotic fruits and food that you can get from Africa. All right, so that's going to be the end of our notes for basically this section altogether. What I'm going to have you guys do is work the rest of class today on your historical analysis essays, as I told you last time. Just a reminder to all of you, the historical analysis essay is going to be, right here. We are going to be doing all of these things. It is due tomorrow, so make sure that you submit it on time on campus. Again, I may not be here in person, but I am 100% checking to make sure that those historical analysis essays have been turned in on time. Remember, this will be your first one too, so that's a 35% part of your grade. Literally, this historical analysis that you're writing on Hammurabi is just as valuable as a test you would take. So this is a really great way to try to raise your grade in history. Don't forget, it's that 5-paragraph essay right here, this document, the historical analysis expectations. You can find this on campus under topics. This document right here is going to walk you through each paragraph, what you're supposed to have, and also how to use evidence and cite evidence. Evidence is the most important part of your historical analysis. I'm going to look at grammar and everything like that a little bit, but the biggest way that you can improve your grade on this historical analysis on Hammurabi is by using good evidence from the sources from the DBQ and explaining why those sources prove your point. Make sure you're working hard on that. This will be your last time to work on it the rest of class today. And I hope you guys do a great job. Turn those in, and we'll see you tomorrow.